you're a military contractor, highly respected, you've been around for 20, 30 years, and you've been given some classified clearance, but nothing having to do with extraterrestrials, but you have a very strong idea that one of the companies that you work for, as well as other contractors that you work with, have helped in reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. Now, the reason I bring this up is because if you're at this type of security clearance, there's a pretty damn good chance you are aware of, at least to a certain extent, the levels of the deep underground military bases, and more so, you have probably utilized or harnessed it as a way of transportation to literally get across the country in a matter of minutes, because these, magneto-leviton trains on the deep underground military base transportation systems are literally that fast, going at Mach 2, Mach 3, sometimes even Mach 4 speeds. Now, you're late for a meeting, say on one side of the country, and you're on the other side or wherever it is. And one of your colleagues / sort of friends says, hey, listen, why don't you just come with me, hop on with me? But you're going to see a couple of things that, you got to shut up about. You say, okay, you know what? In the back of your head, you shouldn't be seeing these things, but you've always wanted to see. You hop on the magneto-leviton train, and your friend / colleague says, okay, we got to just make a quick stop. Listen, whatever you see, you did not see it, no matter what. Because if so, your career's ruined, mine's ruined, that's it, right? Totally just a, couple of co-workers not doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of following protocol. Long story short, you see a couple of what seem to be males, men, a little bit taller than you, probably, 7.5 feet, but quite tall for, compared to the average human. Very pale. Their eyes are that of like a reptilian or lizard eyes. And you see your friend or colleague walk up to them, and they're just looking at each other. No communication. But you don't ask any questions because you know how serious this is, right? Your friend comes back into the magneto-leviton train, and your friend then says, he sits down and he says, all right, let's get you to where you got to go. Very quietly and quickly on the way to your location, to where your friend's going to drop you off using the magneto-leviton system, you ask your friend, can I ask what that was or what those were? And you kind of give your friend a look like, listen, I've been here for 20, 30 years. I sort of know. You know what I mean? You know those looks that people give? Okay. Your friend then looks at you and says, these are called nulls, N-U-L-L. And you say, oh, is there any chance that, it's possible one of these days, even in the future, I could meet one of them? And then your friend / colleague says, well, those ones are only going to be here for the day, then they're gone. And then you go, what do you mean? Now, before I start this episode, I know that was a bit of a long example, so please forgive me, but I do want to give a shout out to my friend Jason on Patreon, as well as my good friend The Worst Unicorn, and I also do want to say I will be getting to everyone's shout outs throughout the coming days, and the giveaway announcement is coming soon as well too, so I'm just going to give it a couple more days on that, because people are still signing up on Twitch and stuff like that, so I want to give everyone an equal chance. So let's jump into it. NULL-7, the occupation of psychonauts that fall on deaf ears. So first off, what we need to do before we get into the really juicy stuff, if you will, is we need to define the term psychonaut. The term, and this is according to hafner.sites.grinnell.edu, the term psychonaut has Greek origins translating roughly to mind sailor, and is used in reference to those who devote themselves to exploring and expanding their consciousness through the use of psychoactive substances and occasionally other mind-altering techniques. It has been applied to people from a variety of different positions in society throughout human history, but has gained far more popularity in the last half-century, end quote. Now, here's the thing about psychonauts in general. People who take psychedelics, DMT, mushrooms, you name it, right, claim to see other interdimensional beings. Now, we know for a fact that there are interdimensional beings that have not walked this planet or on this dimension in a humanoid form, but a lot of them want to. That's why a lot of people who do shrooms or any type of psychedelic end up seeing other beings that then say to them, oh my gosh, they either say it verbally or telepathically, we're so happy you found this new realm or this new dimension that opened up your senses, right, which is a whole other argument about psychedelics. But anyways, some of these interdimensional beings, believe it or not, as a matter of fact, do have negotiations and deals with Russia, China, the United States government, you name it. Why? Because when it comes to asymmetrical warfare and high-level assassinations, the mainstream media always says, well, this one was poisoned, this one had, a very mysterious heart attack. It's not always poisoning, folks, because nowadays with the way of digital tracking and things like this, it's much more harder to do. So what is done. There are certain people, certain soldiers from the 20 and back secret space program that are actually sent into deep underground military bases because they have this telepathic ability already opened up in their minds. They negotiate with these interdimensional beings. How do they negotiate, and what's the leverage they have? Well, these interdimensional beings, their biggest wish is to be able to communicate and interact with humans on this earth. But how could you do that if you're not here in the physical form, right? The way you do that is by creating an alien human hybrid body that these interdimensional beings can go into. But there's a catch, right? Obviously, when you're dealing with government officials and even other extraterrestrial entities, you have to be vigilant. There's always a catch. It's like sitting at a negotiation table, right? What the deals are usually made for, and I'll provide the evidence for this shortly, is that generally speaking, these soldiers will go in on behalf of, military industrial complex intelligence officers, the generals of the military, and say, listen, we need you as a psychonaut to enter this hybrid body, all right? But we need you to go take out, or literally kill and murder someone using telepathic abilities when in this hybrid body. And then after that, you'll have, 4 or 5 human days in the way that we measure time to do whatever you want with this body, and then you have to return to a certain dumb base at a certain time. Now, there are a few that try to veer off the beaten path and not return on their deadline, right? Which is why we see a lot of very strange humanoid bodies ending up dead and mutilated in the forest, because if these interdimensional beings don't listen, they're then taken out by, literally murdered by another set of aliens that then, in exchange for helping humans kill this interdimensional being, right, that is using a hybrid body, the aliens can then mutilate that body, which is why so many human mutilated bodies are found. Now, the reason... Pardon me, alarm just went off. The reason why, I do have to say, a lot of these hybrid bodies in general are actually needed is because of the fact that overall, there needs to be a little bit of alien DNA inside of these bodies in order for the interdimensional beings to enter. And you might be saying, Dave, how is that the case, and why is this even the situation? Well, the reason for this, folks, is because human bodies, in a physical sense, have been suppressed throughout human history and throughout the resetting of civilization so much that there actually needs to be a little bit of alien DNA, preferably Venusian, Nordic, you name it, that has a little bit more of a sensory expansion. And I will refer you to the video or the article that we analyzed a couple days ago in yesterday's episode, having to do with a former military officer, high-level officer, by the way, everything checks out and verified, saying that there are 57 different alien species on this planet that look just like humans. But the difference is they can see perfectly in the nighttime. Their gut or their instinct, if you will, or their third eye is awakened. They can know things, generally, a relative amount of time before they happen, and that's the reason. Now, these interdimensional beings, these psychonauts, also are involved in things like gang stalking. They're also involved in things like taking up the form of these hybrid bodies and dressing up as men in black, which is why a lot of times these men in black come, they scare someone, they take something or what have you, and then they suddenly disappear. Now, you might be saying, okay, Dave, why is it that you say this falls on deaf ears? And this is very interesting, folks, and I want to be very particular about this. DEAF, according to Intention.com, but we're also going to look at another article, stands for Defense Enabling and Assisting Framework. Long story short, it is an extremely advanced, high-tech communication device. All right, communication software, that allows for basically it to be non-hackable, if you will. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because we need to take a look here at this document, Radio Frequency / Microwave Radiation Biological Effects and Safety Standards, June 1988. The study of human exposure to radio frequency / microwave radiation has been the subject of widespread investigation and analysis. It is known that electromagnetic radiation has a biological effect on human tissue. All right? End quote. We know this, folks. Look at things like, for example, I believe it was William Reich who had the orgone box. That's where people could heal with frequencies, and then suddenly, this gentleman's invention was patented, purchased, and then put away. Healing through frequencies is a matter of fact a way in which the Pleiadians and Venusians also do forms of healing instead of other ways in which we generally do now, which again arguably make us even more sicker. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because this was initially started by President Eisenhower, who again signed the 1954 Greada Treaty. But here's what's interesting. Take a look at these documents right here, folks. You know how hard it was for me to find this? And again, I'm putting the link in the description because we all need to see this information. The UFOchronicles.com. These are briefings to President Eisenhower on psychonaut beings, not physical aliens, all right? Because there were aliens that Eisenhower made deals with, and there were ones that he could not make deals with because it's just there was no middle ground to be made with certain beings, right? And so what happened was that there at the time was someone named Secretary Forstall, okay? And Secretary Forstall, his full name is James Forstall, according to Wikipedia, was the last cabinet-level United States Secretary of the Navy and was the first United States Secretary of Defense, end quote, under President Eisenhower. Him and Mr. Forstall and Eisenhower had a falling out because allegedly Mr. Forstall was going around to different members of Congress trying to poach them in a way and try to tell them about the alien situation because Mr. Forstall felt that the negotiations that Eisenhower was making were not good. Mr. Forstall felt no deals with aliens should be made whatsoever. Zap, nada, that's it. Nothing, right? But here's the interesting thing. If you look back at the documents that were briefing Eisenhower, very vague, I have to say, very hard to read, but if you can make it out, I'll sum it up for you. It references the beings that we cannot see. They're referring to the psychonauts. Mr. Forstall was not only going to Congress members, men and women, by the way, Republican and Democrat, not to discuss necessarily the deals that Eisenhower already made, as a matter of fact, folks, but to discuss the deals with these psychonauts, because again, this is how modern day assassinations are generally carried out. Now, we can also take a look at a lot of different aspects of this too, because if we take a look, for example, at this right here, researchgate.net, does the nervous system have an intrinsic archaic language, synoptic images, and phosphenes? Now, phosphene is basically, long story short, things that you see that you think are real, but they're not really real, and they're just within the perception of your eyes. Now, when we take a look at this study, it reports that phosphene, or for example, things that certain people see that others do not, may in fact be legitimate, but here's the thing. The belief system is not awakened enough, and I say awakened very carefully, but the energetic frequencies have not aligned to the vast majority of consciousnesses on this planet, because according to quantum physics, whatever you manifest, you can actually turn out to have a physical product or an end result, if you will, right? And so the idea here is that phosphine taps into that. It taps into things like light codes. It taps into many different things. Now, if we take a look here at someone, and I'm taking a risk doing this, but I honestly don't care because I think it's very important to be said. Fox News. I just picked Fox. You can look at many other ones. Actor Isaac Cappy, dead at 42 after he forced himself off a bridge, posted ominous apology to Trump and QAnon, end quote. Now, this is not about QAnon, but I do have to say, Mr. Isaac Cappy admitted to many things about pedophilia and things like that before he jumped off of a bridge. Now, allegedly, Mr. Cappy was in secret talks with certain levels of government, and I can't say who publicly for many reasons. YouTube will probably remove me if I say specifically because they'll try to indicate that I'm whatever. Anyways, he essentially was about to make a major announcement in Revelation. All of a sudden, he jumped off a bridge. No previous medical records of mental health. Now, he admitted to former drug abuse and things like this. But folks, does this not, if we play devil's advocate, does this not seem like the perfect setup for a psychonaut assassination? Do you see what I'm saying here? Right? And we see, like, for example, poisoning still goes on these days, but overall, we have to understand that psychonautic behavior and these interdimensional beings are working with certain governments in order to perform certain intelligence operations and apparatuses. Now, let's take a look very quickly at the exact definition of phosphene. A phosphene, and I quote, is the phenomenon of seeing light without light actually entering the eye. The word phosphene comes from the Greek word. Now, notice how a lot of this comes from the Greek word. You know what I'm saying? A lot of this comes from the Greek culture in general, and they were not stupid people. Phosphines that are induced by movement or sound may be associated with optic neuritis, end quote. Now, notice something. There's been a major revision and study about optic neuritis, about how, on a public level at least, the doctors got it wrong, generally speaking. So clearly there's something here that is being hidden. Now, the final thing I want to say too is that the 5G radio waves that are being emitted, as a matter of fact, do they make the cell phone coverage faster? Yes, but 5G has a ton of issues with it, and a lot of it is scary because we're just finding out now, for example, that 4G satellites were placed and camouflaged as trees, as, different natural objects, not only in forests, but in the cities of the world as well, of major cities. And all of a sudden, people are saying, No one ever told us this. AT&T and them, they never told us that they were camouflaging this stuff, and now they're saying it because, again, it's old news. Oh, yeah, well, you know it was there, right? You knew about that. Nobody did, folks. Nobody did. But the point here is that 5G is now the next level of it, but it's being exposed in a way that psychonauts actually have more access. So as a matter of fact, 5G, long story short, allows for these psychonauts to interact with this three-dimensional world much more easier, so the United States government and many other governments don't necessarily need to make as many deals with psychonauts entering hybrid bodies, because again, to manufacture a hybrid body takes, well, I can't really say publicly, but on Patreon, you guys know what it takes. It takes abduction and kidnapping and, certain things to happen. So long story short, I want you all to let me know what you think. I think it was a very intriguing set of information that we looked at here, and we will catch all of you tomorrow. Cheers.